I don't know his thinking. I don't know a lot of details about why he came to the conclusions he did on some things. But I feel like I can fully sustain him as a prophet, fully love him as my great grandfather.
Mornings are better with a warm beverage, even for Latter-day Saints. Meet Postum, the ideal coffee alternative and proud sponsor of This Week in Mormons podcast. Spotted on the coffee aisle at Smith's Grocery or at your local nearby store. Can't locate it? No worries. Order it at postum.com. Explore delicious recipes to tailor your Postum experience. Start your day off right with Postum.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to This Week in Mormons with the Twim siblings. And this is an interview edition. I'm really excited about our guest today. Melissa, what do you know about our guest today?
I know that his first name is Sam and his last name is Benson.
All right. So from
Good?
time to yeah, that's pretty good. From
Okay.
time to time, we get feedback from listeners that are like, hey, you should do some more research on your guest so that you can have a more in-depth discussion about things. And what do we say to that, Melissa?
We say we don't like to go in depth. We dig deep on shallow topics. Have we ever said that? Or can we start saying that?
I don't even know what that means.
I don't either.
We dig
Just
deep
kidding.
on shallow. We like
Okay.
to keep it shallow. That's what we're trying to say. We like to keep it shallow. We don't want to go too in depth.
Okay.
Sam, do you want to
Sorry, Sam.
introduce? Melissa's introduction was a little bit not satisfactory. Do you want to introduce yourself, Sam?
This is my kind of podcast. I'll start by saying my middle name is Barnes.
Oh,
Okay. Look how
We
much
can
we've
stop
learned
there.
already.
We have all three names covered.
that's right.
I'm a journalist. I cover national politics for the Deseret News, based in Washington, D.C. Just finished a cycle covering the presidential race, and now we're transitioning to cover Utah's delegation and national politics, but with an eye toward things that are important to Latter-day Saints and folks in the West. And it's fun. It's a fun job. It's been a crazy year, and we'll probably only get crazier, but it's been fun.
Yeah, it sounds fun. Here's what I'm really excited about, Sam, is that my brother Matt, he likes to quote all sorts of statistics about election stuff, and I know he's making it all up. So I feel like we have an opportunity here for you to say, like, that's not quite right. So this is what I'm most excited about.
Perfect.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a second. And I also want to talk about your personal life a little bit, but I want to start with your professional life. So where did you go to college? Why did you decide journalism? And how'd you get to the Deseret News?
Sure. I went to BYU, Provo. I had a wonderful experience there. I actually studied sociology, not journalism. And the idea is that I was going to study sociology, go to law school, and then practice immigration law. And part of that, I think, was an outgrowth of my mission, served a Spanish-speaking mission to Boston. I think another big part of it was simply the fact that when you're kind of in those later years of high school, early years of college, and you don't want to do STEM, you go through a law school phase. And so that was how it was for me. And then I eventually did an internship with the Deseret News after my freshman year on the opinion desk. I just fell in love with reporting and with politics. And I was already, 2 semesters into the sociology degree, really loved my professors and my classmates, and figured, why don't I try and keep both of these doors, the law school door and the sociology and the journalism door open as long as possible. And then it ended up me getting, a double major in sociology and Spanish, but then graduating and keeping employment with the Deseret News covering politics. So kind of the best of both worlds. But I've been at Deseret now for almost 5 years and have really loved it.
So when you were a kid, were you a news junkie? Did you watch the Sunday morning news shows and things like that?
I would take the newspaper and rip out the sports section and then only read the sports section. So I was reading a paper every day, but it was usually only, the sports columns. And that was actually my start. When I was 12, I started writing for a sports blog and just fell in love with it. And then it wasn't until I was in high school that I started working for a local paper. I got really interested in local government and that type of thing. But yeah, at first it was just sports. I was never, I wasn't watching Meet the Press on Sunday mornings or anything like that. I was watching, Inside the NBA on Tuesdays. That's
Yeah,
what it
that
was.
feels better. I really would have lost respect for you if you'd been watching Meet the Press
But
in high school.
But he got into local government in high school, Melissa. So,
I know. Local government's a really popular thing to study in high school, actually. Like, especially in Utah, I feel like the We the People program
Mm,
and like the Model UN, like those are really big programs in Utah.
it's
But
true.
Sam you didn't grow up in Utah, did you, Sam?
Yeah, so I went to high school in Utah. I went to Manti High
Uh-huh.
School in central
Oh.
Utah. My mother was teaching at Snow College, but went to middle school in Virginia. Um, but yeah, so I claim Utah as my home.
So wait a minute. When you say you're into local government, is it Manti, like city government you're into?
Yeah, so I worked for the Stampede Messenger in high school. That was my first paid newspaper job. So that was covering Stampede County politics, so Ephraim and Manti and Fairview and that area.
Monroe? Did you get over to Monroe?
Monroe's Sevier County, so that's just south of
Oh,
us.
Way
oh,
too
too
far
bad.
away.
But
My
rival high
only
schools, yeah,
Okay,
Uh-huh.
okay, good, good, good. We have family from Monroe.
nice.
My only really knowledge of Manti is when I've driven through, like for the Manti pageant. We used to do that, but it's. I
I'm so
feel like
sorry.
Manti is all like old school polygamist homes. Like they have many, many doors on them,
Yeah,
like with for all the different entrances for the different families. Is that right? Does that
yeah. I
feel
mean,
to
I don't
you?
have any data substantiating the polygamist population of Manti, but I went to high school with kids that were from polygamous families. Yeah, and it was interesting, but I have no idea like how many there are.
Yeah, it's fine. You can stick with statistics. It's fine.
So
I'll
I'm really curious, Sam. In the current media landscape, it seems to me like newspapers are a dying breed, and the journalists of the future are on maybe TikTok or X or something like that. Am I wrong about this?
Yeah, this is something that I wake up every morning and have to think about in some capacity because working for a newspaper that has been around for 200 or sorry 170 odd years, um, we're not doing the same thing that we did, uh, you know, 10 years ago, even, or 5 years ago. And I think this presidential cycle, more than any other, really solidified what the media of the future may look like. And it probably isn't the legacy papers writing for, printed stacks that go out every morning. And we already knew that in terms of, print media being a dying breed. But I think there was this real hope that, the gatekeepers of truth and journalistic integrity would still be the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post and the New York Times. And I think that was certainly challenged just by the things that were most important to individuals across the country. I mean, you look at Trump's interview with Joe Rogan and the reach that had, and I would have to go look at the official numbers, but it was something like 6 times the most popular Fox News show of the same cycle. So you're talking about the people in theory that would be the same that are supporting Trump, and yet are so much more interested in a podcast, whether that be watching it on YouTube or streaming on Spotify or whatever, than flipping on the evening news from their channel of choice. So it's something I think about a lot. I don't think anyone knows what the future holds, but it's worrisome, I think, to some of us.
I think it's worrisome too. It stresses me out a little bit. I'm in charge. My day job is teaching high school, and I'm in charge of teaching research. So how to get information, how to judge information, and I'm here to tell you that 95% of high schoolers think that TikTok is news. Like that's where they get all of their sources from, and it's not because they necessarily trust it. It's because it's so easy and they don't want to take the time to dig deeper. Quite frankly, it's not that important to them. It's much more entertaining, you know. And I'm not saying that like as they grow up that's the only thing that they're going to do, but it's definitely a different way of looking at the world. Like they've never watched news on TV, they've never held a physical newspaper. Like that's just not the way of things.
Yeah, it's true. I think often about kind of the dot-com boom and when a lot of media organizations switched over to digital offerings, having a website, having a presence on the web. And that for a lot of people was very awkward. And that was kind of when I kind of came to conscience in some ways when it came to news. When it was like, the internet was the big thing, but it was becoming normal. And it eventually became normal. And, I work in journalism and I know very few people that still have subscriptions to a print newspaper. I mean, if people are reading traditional news, it's on websites. And so the issue, though, I think, is that it's not just that the medium is being challenged here, but the quality of content. And for the longest time, we viewed newspapers as kind of the arbiters of journalistic integrity. And we're seeing these new mediums arise that perhaps don't have the same guardrails. And even when you go on TikTok and are looking at news, they're like looking at screenshots of what's being written by journalists and then kind of riffing on it most often. And so it's one of those things that I think the media industry is like, everyone's all like, oh, they're going to die, or they need to adjust or die or adapt or die. And I think the adaptation is necessary, but this adaptation simply has to be, how do we maintain the same standards by branching into new medium?
So, so how do you, as a journalist, establish legitimacy? Like, there was a time when you could just trust the brand of your employer, right? And you could say,
Sure.
"Look, I'm at the Deseret News, therefore you should trust me." But I've noticed even the Deseret News has changed its model a little bit in how it reports the news. So how do you, in this current landscape, establish yourself as a reputed source that people can turn to for information?
I found that a lot of people, a lot of our readers, and perhaps even a lot of people that are very close to the news industry, don't really understand how a story is reported. We go to a rally, or we go and sit down with a candidate, and then we publish a story after. A lot of people don't really know the nuts and bolts of what goes into first the decision to write this story, and then the process of that being reported. And so a decision we made at the start of this process of covering this 2024 race, which we did in a way that Deseret had never done, and we can dive into that if we want to later. But we decided that we would put a real emphasis on going to where voters were, reporting what voters were thinking, and then being as clear as we possibly could to our readers about how we were doing that. So we launched a newsletter that went out twice a week. It was called On the Trail. I wrote it on Tuesdays and Fridays. And the whole idea was just trying to kind of peek back or pull back the curtain a bit for our readers on what we were doing. And so, I'd be in Milwaukee for a debate, and I would have followed a story the night of the debate and maybe a day after story. But in the newsletter, I was writing about kind of who I was talking to and how I was gathering sources and what I was doing. And I wasn't, of course, betraying confidential information that sources gave, on background off the record, or things like that, but simply allowing our readers to kind of see what's it like to gather news and how are we doing it. And hopefully they're then not just, taking everything that we say on face value, but it's causing them to kind of dig deeper in their own ways because they're understanding why we're doing what we're doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I imagine you have to walk a little bit of a different line too, just because of your demographic of the Deseret News. I mean, is it always in the back of your head that this is a large LDS audience? Utah voters look at things a little bit differently. Does that make you have to adjust your reporting, or is that not really something you think about?
Yeah, I think it absolutely leads to conversations about like making different choices of what we write about and why. We knew going into the presidential race, for example, that we weren't going to beat the New York Times to every scoop. But we did know that we could probably control the market on really strong coverage of what candidates were saying about religious liberty, for example, or what they were saying about family policy, or how they were approaching immigration in ways that might resonate with our audience if it's humane and human centered. And so those were kind of things that we were able to think, okay, our audience is mostly in the Intermountain West. Most of them are people of faith. A lot of them are conservatives. And so how are we going to write in a way that resonates with them and is like a value add to them? Because if people want, news on the presidential race, they're not going to come to Deseret. That's not their first choice. So how do we write something in a way that is going to appeal to them because it's something that they're interested in and other people aren't writing about? So I think your assumption is spot on that we have to go about it in a different way, or else we simply wouldn't be relevant.
Do your readers? Guessing the answer is yes, but the follow up is going to be like, how has it shifted over time? But do your readers understand the difference between an opinion piece and a reporting piece? And do they expect you to do things that are maybe something a reporter wouldn't normally do?
It's a good question. I don't think I could speak for all of our audience. I'd hope they would tell the difference. I mean, our website it was easier back in the day where we weren't reading websites, we were reading printed papers. And it was, you would have your news section and you would have your editorial page or your opinion section. And now if people are reaching their news through an aggregator, so through Google News or through Apple News or something, they're maybe not immediately seeing the tag. I hope when people see my byline and it says, I'm the national political correspondent or I'm a reporter, what they're going to get is either, reporting or reported analysis. And it's not going to be an opinion column. But I will say, I don't think I can answer affirmatively if they know the difference, but I would say I hope they can find the difference because the line is being blurred in a lot of ways,
Yeah,
simply
it
because the
is.
way people are consuming news.
Yeah, and I say this as a consumer of the news. Sometimes it's hard for me to tell from the Deseret News
Yeah.
who's doing what. Like, there are a handful of people at the Deseret News that I really respect and admire their work. You're one of them. That's why I like talking to you. But then it feels like there are these other people that are almost like bloggers or something like that, or they're just writing some opinion piece. And it's really hard to tell the difference of like, okay, who are the reporters? Like for me to find a national correspondent at the Deseret News, I was like, whoa, what are they doing? They haven't done this in a while. They've always done like, hey, so and so lives here and they're writing some story about their community and that's sort of national or something like that. Like it seems like there's a bit of a shift there going on, but maybe it's harder for the consumers to be aware of what's actually happening there.
I think that's fair, and I think a lot of that's probably on our end. We need to do a lot better at helping our readers differentiate, labeling it clear, and then writing in a way that is clear. You don't have to guess. I think part of that probably has to do with a shift that we've been undergoing for the last several years, and I think editors of the paper and leaders of the company could speak to this better than I could. But ever since our joint operating agreement with the Salt Lake Tribune ended in 2020, we decided to stop writing a daily print paper, and along with that came a strategy shift away from being the Metro Daily that we've been for 150 plus years into being kind of a larger regional news source. So along with that came the launch of Deseret Magazine, which that goal is to be a really strong news magazine that rivals Mother Jones or the Atlantic or the New Yorker or National Review, not in focus or scope, but simply in quality. And the idea that it would be a news magazine that focuses on the Intermountain West. But magazine writing is a lot different in some ways than straight newspaper reporting. There's a lot more free reign for the reporter to kind of interject their own perspective, to come at it in a way that's more personal and take readers on a journey. And I think it's really hard sometimes then to draw the line between what is, straight reporting and what is, perspective, things like that. So I think it's part of our evolution, but I think you're right, Matt. We need to do better at helping our readers distinguish and then actually distinguishing on our end.
Yeah. I think the magazine is a smart shift, though. Something that's different as you switch to completely digital is that you get a lot of, let's see, comments, feedback from readers, and that's not something that's ever been part of journalism. How much does that affect? I don't know. Do you pay attention to it? Do you care what they have to say, or is it just kind of a platform for them to talk to each other as readers?
Yeah, it's a I don't, I'll be honest, I don't read the comments on our website.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
I
Oh
I
love
think I
man.
engaging with our readers. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't think I would if I was the reporter, right? Like I
Yeah,
wanted to maintain that reporter professionalism, but
yeah.
it's something that's kind of constantly going and keeping news happening, I guess.
I'm just
Yeah.
feeling sad. I've put so many comments there, Sam, and you've never responded to them.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is this. I think it's essential for a reporter to know his audience or her audience. Like, it's really hard to write for somebody if you don't know who's consuming it because you don't know what they need, they don't know how they're reacting to things. I just encourage our readers, if they want to communicate, that we do it either over social media or like via email. The difficulty with comments, and to a similar degree social media, but I find it worse on comment boards, is that everyone's using a pseudonym, and so no one's actually having, you're having a conversation, but you're having it with a screen. And I think it's a lot easier for people to be a caricature of themselves when they're using a pseudonym. And I've found very few occasions in which I've found readers being sensible and honest, and perhaps nuanced behind the guise of a common avatar. That said, I've had really wonderful conversations with even very critical readers on social media or in email. So I welcome that, but I wish there were a way for comment boards to be more effective because it is nice that it's right there on the store. You know exactly what you're talking about, and there are some news organizations that I think have cultivated this in a really unique way. I think the Dispatch is one, where you log into your Facebook account, so your name's on it, and they've really cultivated, I think, a unique online community that's like housed around or perhaps next door to their publication. So they have the writers all here, but then they have this like pretty wholesome community of people that are critical and kind of question or push back on things. But at the end of the day, they're there, like having real conversations. And sometimes I don't see that in our comment boards.
So tell us a little bit about the Desert News's approach to the 2024 election coverage. What did you decide to do differently this time?
Yeah, well, we knew going in exactly what was going to happen. So that's why we chose. No, just kidding.
Yeah,
It was
did you?
so these conversations kind of started in late 2023, so probably early to mid 2023 in hindsight. And the idea was we knew that America, in a lot of ways, was I don't want to say at a tipping point, but I think you've both felt this. There's just a lot of real contention, even when you go to church on Sundays or you have conversations in the grocery store. It feels like everyone was engaged with national politics in a way that perhaps they hadn't been in past election cycles, and there was a real sense that things could get very ugly. Um, and I think that the editors of the Deseret News, when they decided or started thinking about how are we going to cover this, they thought we should be engaging in the national conversation in a way, but hope there's a value add. Like, what is the Deseret News way of covering a presidential race? What is perhaps the Latter day Saint way of approaching national politics? And I don't want to insinuate for a second that we did that perfectly or that we're the model for that, because I think we fell short in a lot of areas. But that was kind of the motivation. So the idea was that we would have a reporter that would be on the trail as much as humanly possible for the 15 or 16 months since we started in fall of 2023 up until November of 2024. We'd be at rallies, we'd be talking to voters, we'd be at debates, we'd be doing kind of stories that were tangentially related to the presidential race. But the whole idea at the end of the day would be how could we infuse the national conversation with things that we felt were important. So we probably spent more time writing about like immigration policy, for example, than I think any other newsroom that doesn't have immigration reporters. And the purpose of that is because I think Latter-day Saints in a lot of ways have really unique views on immigration for being a political bloc that's largely conservative. And we just felt there were a few candidates talking about it in the way that we wanted them to. So we were trying to infuse the conversation, covering and questioning why or why not. Same thing with religious liberty. I mentioned family policy. I think those are all areas that I think we did solid reporting on. And then we were also doing our best to break news and get scoops and write about the news of the day. But it was all kind of driven, but I think by what I think is kind of a different ideal. And we weren't perfect, but that was the motivator.
So is the plan? Go ahead, Melissa.
No, well, I was just going to say, I think that I noticed that a lot. I mean, as part of the podcast, the weekly podcast, we definitely have to look at Desert News and the articles and what you guys publish and see which of them are relevant to the Mormon audience. It seems like I don't know if this was kind of just the feeling that we got from reading the Desert News, but it seems like through those stories, the Mormon vote became kind of important, especially in states like Nevada and Arizona. Like there was a focus on that where I don't know if that was actually more of a focus or it was just something that I got to read stories about because of the way you guys approached it.
Yeah, I mean, I would love it if our reporting caused either of the campaigns to focus on Latter-day Saint voters. I mean, I can't say firmly it did, but that's something we were harping on from like as soon as I mean the Republican primary really didn't matter to Latter-day Saint voters because it was over after South Carolina. So you have,
Yeah.
Iowa, which we left, North New Hampshire, and South Carolina. And so not large Latter-day Saint populations. We found some interesting connections, like Vivek Ramaswamy in Iowa hired a pair of former missionaries to run his campaign there because they
Wow.
helped Romney. And he thought, if I'm a Hindu and I want to win Iowa evangelicals, I need people that know how to do this. So like we found
Ah.
cool connections, but Latter-day Saint votes weren't going to decide any of those states. And then there wasn't really a Democratic primary. So as soon as Super Tuesday was over and they started focusing on these swing states that included Arizona and Nevada, we knew this is our bread and butter. Like we need to be harping this and figuring out how are Latter-day Saints on the ground feeling, what are they talking about. And our saving grace was this survey that American Enterprise Institute put out probably in May. You could check me on that, where they surveyed 6,000 Americans on a range of political issues, but things that included, do you feel like the two major parties have abandoned you? What do you think of Joe Biden and Donald Trump? Um, some immigration related questions, some religious questions. And Latter day Saints, I think, looked pretty good in the polls in terms of if you're trying to look like a swing block. saying more so than any other group, we feel like both parties have abandoned us. Saying more so than any other group besides Jews that we think leaders should be honest and ethical. Like things like this that I think, oh, all of a sudden, this could be a 2016 moment where we matter. So we reported, I think, we reported that angle to death, and it wasn't until I think September, October that Vice President Harris launched kind of targeted advisory committees in both states of Latter Day Saints, and then Trump followed up with the national committee, and we did really strong reporting as well on both of those groups, and exposed some stuff that I thought was helpful to our readers, and so I thought it was successful. But yeah, it took the campaigns a while to jump on board.
So is the plan to continue this kind of reporting into the transition? You're in DC now, right? So are you going to
Correct.
stay there and keep doing this?
Yeah, so we're here kind of for the long haul. I mean, that's as much a professional decision as it is personal. My wife and I live here. She's applying to law schools in the area. We kind of want to, settle down here and live here. But it goes along with this Deseret News emphasis of finding a way to cover national politics in a way we haven't before, and that's beneficial to our readers. So for now, I'll be covering Utah's congressional delegation from here, as well as covering the White House. And a lot of this, we're kind of just building the plane as we go. It's been over a decade since Deseret's had an on the ground DC bureau or a DC reporter. Up until the pandemic, they had someone that was coming out like once a month, going back and forth, and it all kind of died. So we're trying to resurrect something that we had before, but we don't want it to just be covering the delegation. We want it to be something bigger, but we're still trying to figure out what that looks like.
That
So
sounds awesome, though.
yeah, I think it's great. So I remember in the first Trump administration, I think it was Playboy News had a spot at the White House press briefing, and there was like sort of some fighting about this guy of Playboy. Can he stay there? Can he
Yeah,
not? Uh, Not that you guys are Playboy magazine, but in some ways, some national news organizations might view the Deseret News as something as strange as
sure.
maybe Playboy magazine, right? I imagine it's hard to talk to somebody and say I'm from the Deseret News compared to saying like I'm an AP staff reporter or something like that. Like, how do you how do you navigate this? There's got to be some people that are like, "What is the Deseret News? Did you just make
Yeah.
this up? Is this like, did you own this?" Or is there some kind of a national brand where you have some legitimacy and respect to people you're talking to?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of talking with the voters, I mean, so we're in random swing states. I'm talking to voters at rallies or on the street. Maybe a quarter of people had heard of Deseret, especially the farther we got from the Intermountain West. But I think in a lot of ways that was helpful. There is like this huge distrust of legacy media right now, which we've touched on. And in some ways, it was helpful to say, yeah, we're from this newspaper, we're based in Salt Lake City, but we're covering national politics with an emphasis on, if the story was about religion, with an emphasis on religious liberty. If we're at the Republican convention, we're from Utah, we're from a conservative state, and we're writing to a largely conservative audience. So it was actually easy to kind of paint the Deseret News in a way that I felt was honest, but also beneficial to whatever story we're doing. I think it's different, though, when I was trying to source up with people inside the campaigns or adjacent to the candidates or things like that. Um, and I think that's where it was beneficial. What you were saying, Melissa, is the Latter-day Saint vote in Arizona and Nevada, because we could kind of say, we view ourselves to be a major news source for Latter-day Saints across the Intermountain West. Um, and that was kind of how we approached it. But yeah, it was unique. It's just totally different than writing for, Politico or the Post or whatever, where people immediately know. That's good and bad though, because they also immediately have an opinion. And for a lot of people, that opinion isn't flattering, which I may disagree with, but perhaps they don't.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of an opportunity for you, huh, to build something that the people aren't familiar with. I mean, I would think even the major players in the Republican Party right now, because there's so much inexperience generally, right, in the Trump orbit. I would imagine even some of those big players have no idea, like, about all these various news organizations that are out there.
Yeah, I had a conversation last night with a reporter who I became really close with over on the trail, and she is doing amazing work right now for a national publication. But I was asking, like, hey, do you know who's running this aspect of the Trump transition? And she's been reporting on the transition for some time, and she said, I have no idea. Like, there's just so many question marks that like
Yeah.
they're really this transition's been incredibly unique because it's run by so many people that are outside of kind of traditional politics. And I think that's really hard as a reporter sometimes, but also I guess it could be a benefit to us. So
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit. How do you like the church out in DC? What's the ward
I
like?
love
How's it
it.
different from Utah? Yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah, so my wife and I are serving in the Spanish ward,
Oh, great.
which is really fun. We both speak Spanish, and we're both serving in youth,
Uh-huh.
and it's been a blast. That was one of the things I was really looking forward to, moving out here and just kind of engaging in a church community that I knew would be different than what we were used to. A big part of that, I think, is, I mean, I mentioned that I lived in Virginia for a while growing up, and the church community in a lot of ways kind of became our family. Like the people that we were around became like some of our closest friends. I mean, we spent Thanksgiving this year with a family that I grew up with that became like a second set of parents to me. And I think that's just kind of part of the reality of perhaps living away from family, is you kind of create another family, and not replacing your family by any means, but just kind of more people that to us starts in the church. And so that's been really fun. Um, and then I'd say it's also been really fun to serve in the Spanish ward because everyone there is from, different parts of the world. Most of them are first generation immigrants, and so they have different life experiences than us. And especially when I'm, engaged every day in an industry that could be really exhausting, especially at the end of the race, it was nice, whether it be on Sundays or Wednesday nights for Mutual, to be able to engage in a community of people that were here because they had hope in our country. And that's been really meaningful to me.
Yeah. Well, so based on what I know about Manti, I would imagine in the ward there, everybody knew all your business. You probably had a very hard time hiding from anybody. I've been in a BYU YSA ward before. You've been all over the place. Like,
Yeah,
what's your favorite? What's your ideal church situation? Is it something like Manti? Is it something like the Spanish ward or Spanish branch?
that's a
What do
great
you like the
question.
best?
I mean, we chose to be in the Spanish ward. We could have
Mhm.
gone to the English ward, and so I think my bias is showing there in some ways. Uh, I think the church is at its best when you have as many different people represented as possible, and I don't mean that in a way of like checking boxes, whether it be on ethnic or gender lines or whatever we want to say. But I think a place where people all are from different walks of life and feel like they're there for a specific reason, and that reason is Christ. Um, when I was at BYU, spent a lot of time in the sociology department, which has become kind of a black sheep on campus in some ways. When there's
Yes,
been
it has.
conversations about, and you probably see this at BYUI as well. I mean, there are a lot of people outside of BYU that have a lot of concerns about BYU, and it was typically about my department or the department that I attended school in. And I
Yeah.
just wasn't seeing the same things that people were seeing. And I think the reason I wasn't seeing it, and perhaps they were, is because I thought my professors did an absolutely fantastic job of engaging students in a way that allowed them to be their full selves in the classroom, but being unequivocally, committed to Jesus Christ and His gospel. And that was just like a really unique space that I think I miss. But I also think there's an opportunity for every church congregation to do that. And so, I probably not the answer to the question you asked, but that's probably
No,
what I'd
no,
say.
I think it's great. Well, so your last name's Benson. I happen to know that you're related to President Benson. And now I know you have this strong sociology background. And it just so happens, Sam, that right now there are a lot of historians and various people discussing the Benson race, legacy, and all of that sort of stuff. I wonder how you feel about that as one of his descendants. I'm sure you love your grandpa. Um, like I'm sure you can see all of the various perspectives that people are advocating out there. Like, what's your take on this? How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I mean, this is all news to me. I'm not quite sure.
Do
um,
you want me to fill you in, Sam?
no, I'm just kidding. First thing I'll say is it's actually really fun to be back in DC, because a lot of people still remember the Bensons that lived here, in the 60s and 70s, and I guess the 50s and 60s. And there's a real legacy of service, I think, in the family here in DC, which is kind of fun in some ways to return to. That said, I mean, I'm three generations removed. I'm a great grandchild. I'm like one of, I don't know how many, but dozens upon dozens. And so I think a lot of people have as close a connection, in terms of like insider knowledge of his thinking or things like that, than anyone who reads a biography, whether it be Sister Du's biography or some of the newer ones, or his own autobiography or whatnot. I will say it's thorny, right? Like there are some things that that you read about statements he took during the civil rights movement, or things that he said about that whole period. I think of both geopolitical affairs and affairs within the church that are deeply uncomfortable to me, and I think to anyone. Uh, One thing that um, I think gives me a lot of hope is recognizing that God works with like imperfect individuals to fulfill his work. And so, yeah, sometimes when people bring up like, oh, he said this or he said that, or like, do you stand by this or do you believe that? And I feel completely comfortable saying, no, like I completely disagree with that. Like, I don't believe the civil rights movement was, a
A
communist
communist.
con or things like that. Like I feel comfortable saying that. I don't think I'm saying that on behalf of the Benson family or because of my lineage or anyway. Nor do I mean any disrespect towards him because I didn't know him. I mean, he passed away before I was born. He was a man of God. He was called by God. Uh, I don't know his thinking. I don't know a lot of details about why he came to the conclusions he did on some things. But I feel like I can fully sustain him as a prophet, fully love him as my great grandfather.
Do you feel an obligation to defend the Benson legacy as a descendant?
The Benson legacy that I like defending, or that I will always defend, is his legacy as president of the church, as someone who counseled us to read the Book of Mormon as a warning for our day, and recognizing that there are a lot of warnings in the Book of Mormon that deal with pride, that deal with race, that deal with how we handle people that are different than ourselves, and taking that literally. I wholeheartedly defend his legacy as president of the church of respecting our nation as a chosen land, and that it's up to us to be a righteous people. Like, yeah, like I fully defend him. I think I feel uncomfortable when people say anything about any church leader and suggesting that they're infallible and that we should like defend all things that they did ever. Like, I don't think we should do that about anyone except the Savior Jesus Christ. There was a story in Wayfair this week written by John Turner, who's a Presbyterian historian who's writing a biography of Joseph Smith right now. And he made a really interesting point. He wrote a biography of Brigham Young. He's written a biography of other church leaders, not a member of our faith, but has a great respect for our faith. And he said, people always ask him, like, these warts and all biographies that he writes. And some people get, uncomfortable with that idea or things like that. And the point he said he makes is that I can't show a full perception of the person without showing their warts. And the things that made them great appear even greater when you also see their imperfections. But he added, you can never make the warts larger than they actually were. And I think that's true of anybody. Um, I don't think I'm the best person to speak on President Benson because I never met him. I'm in the process of reading Sherry Dew's biography right now. I've read some of the other biographies on him. Um, but I think that would be my answer. It's like I'll absolutely defend what he meant to my family, what he did for the church, while disagreeing pretty heartily on some of the other things, which I think we all have disagreements with people. That doesn't make them any lesser.
Sure, sure. Okay, now, Sam, did you meet your wife at BYU? And follow up, if so, how long was your engagement?
Yeah, so we met in England actually. We were both
Oh, yeah.
doing a term abroad that was through BYU, but we were
Cool.
there. There were like 200 undergrads all doing a term there from all over the world. And there were 6 of us through BYU. So we were the group that would go to church together and things like that. And yeah, we started dating there. We ended up dating almost 2 years before we got married.
What?
And so,
What? This is insane.
Provo
But
record.
I have to tell you this, Melissa. More and more, the young people I meet are waiting longer in their engagements and not getting married so fast.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's a good
Um,
thing, I think. But
yeah. Yeah, I love that story, though. It feels kind of meant to be. Going to the same university, but not meeting till you went to England. That's pretty
yeah,
good.
so our freshman year, so this is right after my mission and right before hers, we were in the same ward at
Uh
BYU.
huh. Uh
We
huh.
lived in adjoining buildings at Liberty Square, and we'd never met, or at least we don't
That
recall
is
meeting.
funny.
And so it
Yeah,
wasn't
that
until
is so
after.
funny.
So yeah,
That's how my daughter and her husband are. They were in the same student ward for 2 years, never met each other, met on mutual. Yep. And then we're like, wait, we're in the same ward? Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, that's crazy.
it happens how it's supposed to happen, I guess. But
exactly. Exactly.
I can't imagine dating someone for 2 years. Like that just is. I can't comprehend it. You say it's better, Sam, but I'm trying to like wrap my head around this. I don't understand.
Yeah,
Dating's
but
awful.
Matt, you didn't kiss your wife before you got married.
Yes, we
really,
did. No.
it's like we need story time.
No.
Just thought
We
I'd try.
kissed.
I thought I'd try it.
No, but this is actually true. My wife is the only person I've ever kissed, and I'm the
Really,
only guy she's ever kissed.
there
Yeah,
you go. Did you meet?
yeah,
Wait, what was the story? Did you meet in college?
yeah. I was her home teacher, and
Nice. Every month,
and
once a month.
way more than that, right? Because she wasn't that into me, so I was like just checking up on the old apartment, making sure everybody's
That's
fine.
classic. Uh,
Eventually, I wore her down, right? Eventually, you get used to somebody being there all the time, and then she went home for Thanksgiving, and she was like, "Something's different in my life." I'm like, "That's what love feels like." I identified love for her.
okay,
Yeah.
next time we need to hear her side. There's got to be two sides of this story.
Right. Hey, well, Sam, it's been great talking to you. I want to know a little bit about the newsletters that you guys do at Deseret News.
Sure.
Because I've noticed some of the reporters do these. Like, what's the purpose of them? How do people subscribe to them? What kind of content do you put out in them?
Yeah, so we have a number of different newsletters. Some are just like news aggregators. So there's one that's Utah Policy, one that's Utah Today, and it's essentially just like a morning digest of the news in Utah. My newsletter is what I mentioned earlier of like pulling back the curtain for our readers on the reporting that we were doing. So On the Trail was twice a week throughout the election, and it was writing about something that wasn't that was either like tangentially related to our stories that we were doing on the trail, or providing like another layer of access or analysis or insight. So the whole idea was kind of to allow our readers to understand exactly what we were doing and why. And so, I mean, the format was always pretty similar. Up top, we'd have kind of like the recent stories we had done, or like 3 things that a reader should know as it relates to the race. We'd have 800 words of whatever the story was, and then we'd close with a few stories from around the web of what I was reading from other publications, from my colleagues on the trail and things like that. And so the idea was never that it would be like a one-stop shop of like, this is all I need to read to like be up to date with the cycle, but simply like an added layer of this is an interesting thing that you might not get elsewhere.
Yeah. And I think most of our listeners are interested in the LDS angle on national politics.
Yeah,
Like your newsletter is a great source for like keeping up on what's going on. And it comes to the inbox, and it's super easy. I really enjoy it.
I appreciate
I,
that.
I wonder, Sam, if you're going to write a book someday. Like, isn't that the way it goes? You're a reporter and then you write a book and then you're
Eventually,
George Stephanopoulos.
yeah, maybe I'll write a memoir about meeting my wife in England, how I wasn't her home teacher. No,
Do you?
yeah, I do think a book is at some point in the future, as it is for most writers. At least we think that we will. I've thrown out ideas before. I started writing one a couple years ago, and then it didn't really uh, come to fruition. But it's certainly something that I think when the right time comes, I'll pursue it. But who knows?
Yeah. Well, for now, I applaud you for fighting the good fight and keeping legacy media alive. And if you transition to other forms of media, I won't hold that against you.
Hmm.
You can
I
be
mean,
a
my
smart.
TikTok dancing is pretty good.
Yeah, I was actually thinking like I bet he's actually pretty much a star on TikTok already.
I don't have a
Yeah.
TikTok actually.
Hey, well, it's been great visiting with you, Sam. Thanks for joining us on the podcast.
No, thank you both.
And
This has been fun.
yeah,
Yep.
it's been great. Listener, we'll talk to you again soon.